All right, well, while people are shuffling in, let's just start by setting the scene a little bit. For those of you that are here already, my name's Caroline Gentry. I work at Nodal Exchange, and we work very closely with Incubex. You may have heard Richard Sander mention Incubex. A lot of people that set up Incubex are those who founded the Chicago Climate Exchange, which is the first voluntary carbon market platform in North America. Later became the Chicago Climate Futures Exchange. So, you know, decades of experience there in the carbon markets. And it's really a pleasure to be here today. So thank you very much to the Climate Action Reserve for inviting me to moderate this panel. You know, I think we've definitely saved the best till last today with the speakers that I have here who represent you know, some of the most exciting things that are going on right now in the carbon markets. Again, for those of you who were here for the fireside chat with Mr. Sander, I thought it was very interesting that he said the best is yet to come. And I think that's, you know, something that we can all be optimistic about, that the carbon markets have survived all of the mud and the challenges that's been thrown at them, and they're maturing. And I think there's no better evidence of that than the news that came out yesterday that Nodal has launched and saw its first trade in the first ever financially settled California carbon futures contract. So we just launched those yesterday, and we had the first trade already on day one. So you'll see there's a growing sophistication in these markets. There's, you know, confidence may occasionally waver, of course, because of the ongoing uncertainty. But I think that we can all be sure that no matter what gets thrown at these markets, they will find a way to survive. So there's a lot going on. I'm not going to belabor the point any longer, although I did think it was interesting that Tim Profeta said that these carbon markets are in their teenage years, and as the mother of a 16-year-old girl, that does mean trouble. So let's hear from, we have Derek Nixon, who's at the Washington Department of Ecology, Eduardo Piquero from the Mexico 2, the Mexican Carbon Platform, and Justin Johnson, who you all know as the RGGI representative from IETA. And I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves before we get going with the questions. So do you want to start, Derek?
Yeah, Derek Nixon. Nice to see all of you. I currently work in the Cap and Invest program of Washington State as a section manager for the allowance market and auctions. And while I'm there, I wear multiple hats, including some of the rulemaking work and speaking with the other jurisdictions with which we're looking to link at this point. Originally, I come from the California Cap and Trade program, so I started there in 2015 after making a good decision to leave graduate school. So it was, I was pursuing a PhD and then decided I wanted to get more into policy work, and this opportunity opened up at California, and definitely happy that I took that path. So yeah, I have some background in California in industrial policy and electricity work, and then started running the program in Washington, the auctions and the market.
Thank you. I'm Eduardo Piquero. I work for Mexico CO2. That's Mexico's environmental carbon slash platform for environmental products at the Mexican Stock Exchange. And we support governments in Mexico at the national and subnational levels, trying to build carbon solutions. And we also spread the word throughout Latin America. We run a series of actions in the Pacific Alliance countries, meaning Colombia, Peru, Chile, and some others, to support the development of carbon markets elsewhere outside Mexico. So we support the design of the Mexican emissions trading scheme and some subnational carbon taxes already in place.
Thanks, Eduardo. I'm Justin Johnson. I'm the East Coast representative for IETA, which just basically means RGGI, for most of the last decade. Prior to that, I worked in state government in Vermont. I was the Commissioner of Environment in Vermont when we first developed RGGI. So it's kind of interesting to think about these markets as teenagers. I remember when they were infants, and I think we have come a long way. We've made some tweaks along the way. We'll make some more that you'll hear about today. But they have been ultimately fairly resilient to different sort of changing winds, both politically and economically. So it's good to see that they're still operating and still doing what they were designed to do. So I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit more about that today and give you some insights into where we go next. So thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all here to find out. Where are we going? But first of all, let's, if everyone could just give a few minutes on, what do you think are the most significant developments that you have seen in each of your markets, Washington, and perhaps we can touch a little bit on California as well, and Mexico and RGGI as well. But do you want to start with that, Derek?
Yeah, so Washington State is at a pretty exciting time right now. We have now had our program going for 3.5 years. We successfully launched it in just under 2 years, going from the time that the legislation passed to the launch of the program. So, and we were definitely able to do that in large part because we were able to leverage lessons from other jurisdictions that had come before us. So California and Quebec had done this, and they'd had time to set it up. We didn't have that same time, but we did have the ability to speak with California and Quebec. And those relationships that we established in 2022 have carried us forward to being able to collaborate with them on a consistent basis. And that's been helpful for us now as we deepen our connections. We recently released a draft linkage agreement last month, and that was something that we did in conjunction with California and Quebec. And all 3 jurisdictions are taking a number of steps that move us closer to linkage that we anticipate would occur next year in 2027. That used to sound so much like the future, very far away, but now it's seeming closer and closer. So yeah, we're looking at an upcoming rulemaking that we need to complete by October of next year. Or sorry, again, seemed like the future, but now is 2026, so I'll say that differently. So October of this year, we need to finish a rulemaking. So that's something that we'll be looking at incorporating some legislation from 2 years ago, last year, as well as changes that are necessary to align our program with the California and Quebec markets. So that's exciting to us. We see that California is currently wrapping up a rulemaking and got the legislative go-ahead on their program. And Quebec has said that they'll be starting, reading through trade press, Quebec has said that they'll be starting their rulemaking relatively soon. So it's an exciting time for us, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And Eduardo, I know that Mexico is at an even earlier phase of developing its markets, but I think we're all interested to hear, the latest and where we might see trading start.
So if the carbon markets are in the teenage years, we are in the toddler years, perhaps. But yes, Mexico has already 11 different carbon taxes in place throughout the country, most of them in heavily industrialized countries. As a matter of fact, Mexico is a heavily industrialized economy. Most of industries that relocated outside the US, they went to Mexico. They didn't have a branch in Mexico, so the amount of emissions grew substantially during the last couple of decades. Most states do either have a carbon tax in place or do have plans to adopt a carbon tax. A very big challenge for that is that they all look quite different in terms of pricing, in terms of thresholds, in terms of gases that are covered. So harmonizing that will take some time. And only 4 of those states, they do have the ability to accept offsets as a means to pay the carbon tax. So there are tax and offset schemes, such as South Africa, for instance, or Colombia. Those states are namely the state of Querétaro, up north of Mexico City, the state of Colima. Colima, it's Mexico's largest port on the Pacific, so it's quite an important state also. Both of them would account for around 600,000 tons. That's not that much in terms of offsets that are being used to compensate those taxes. Also, the states of Tamaulipas and Querétaro, they will allow carbon offsets to be used in their scheme. What is very important from those 2 states that those are Mexico's largest emitters. So those are very important markets to be developed on the forthcoming years. On the other side, at the national level, Mexico has been working on the national ETS for 10 years or so. We had this pilot phase that finished in 2022, and the previous administration finished in 2024. So the new administration that took over is very vocal about launching the ETS in 2026. So we might hear something from the current administration before the end of the year. In that sense, there is a very huge challenge for Mexico, as you all may know. Mexico energy sector is heavily controlled by the state. The only oil and gas company is controlled by state, and around 50% of all energy generation, electricity generation, is produced by the same state-owned company. So those remains very important barriers. In light of the current actions in the Middle East and so forth, so with energy prices going up, we foresee that's going to be a challenge for the national government to keep implementing the plans towards an ETS and to have that up and ready before the end of the year. So all in all, there is also another very big challenge for Mexico. It's the renegotiation of the free trade agreement with the US. I do believe that Mexico, I doubt that we will get secondary regulation on that issue, on the emissions trading scheme, the cap and trade program, before we reach an agreement with the US in terms of free trade.
Okay, that's an interesting barrier that has to be overcome first, yeah. And of course, that's a big unknown right now, yeah. Well, let's move on to RGGI, a little bit more familiar to most of us. We did hear a little bit this morning about RGGI, but I'm interested to hear your views on where we're going next.
Sure. Well, in terms of sort of milestones, important things, it was a bit of a milestone this week that the RGGI price was essentially the same as the California price. And if you take into account the fact that RGGI's using short tons, it was maybe a little higher because you get a little less for your money in RGGI in that respect. But the other obvious sort of milestone was the program review finally got done. It took too long. It was just forever being negotiated amongst the states. It's a challenge because you've got 10 states, soon to be 11, and that always means that they have to just keep talking until they get to a sweet spot where everyone's in agreement. But we finally got there. The states are actively pursuing their individual regulatory processes to implement that, the model rule for 2027. I think they're all on track to get there. Maryland gets the gold star. They've already finished their rulemaking and put the 2027 rules into place, but New Jersey, New York, Vermont, Delaware are all sort of in the process. New Hampshire is a little bit different because they have to go through their legislature first, but that happened, or there was a vote on that, a positive one last week, so that one's moving. Massachusetts hasn't really got anywhere with theirs. I mean, they've started, but very early stages, but I don't see any reason why they won't all be done in time for 2027. And then the third sort of milestone, I guess, is that with the election of Governor Spanberger in Virginia, you see Virginia now, the legislature and the governor sort of falling over themselves to see who's going to take credit for getting Virginia back into RGGI. Exactly what that looks like and when they'll be participating in auctions again, I think is still a little unclear, but I think we could all be pretty sure that they'll be back in, and they too will have to go through a rulemaking process to get their rules up to speed with the 2027 regulations. It's the 2025 model rule, but it goes into effect in 2027. So I think they're the major pieces. Finally, some movement there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, let's talk about something that, Eduardo, you brought up briefly there, but I think, you know, the big theme that's come out already today is affordability. You know, it is difficult with rising prices, some public concern, you know, gas prices are going up. Some states, I know, are looking at their targets, their RPS programs. Derek, I'm interested to know, with the stakeholder meetings coming up on Washington, what are you doing to address cost concerns? You know, are you going to have the customer rebate like they have in California? Is everything going to be exactly the same with your cost containment reserve price, and is it going to be 100% the same?
Yeah, I think an important thing to know about the Cap and Invest program for us is that we see it as one of the key economy-wide programs. So we have multiple programs in Washington, including one on the electricity sector, one clean fuel standard program. But Cap and Invest covers 70% of the emissions in the state. So it's a really good opportunity to allow trading and finding the lowest cost opportunities for reductions across the entire economy. So, and we do include some of the provisions that have been best practices across jurisdictions. So EITE allocation for the electricity and natural gas sector to protect ratepayers. So some of those design features are really built into the program to help from the get-go in allowing the economy to adapt and respond to the carbon price. And then to the extent we can, we're often providing as much heads up or market clarity to participants that something is changing. We're going to provide guidance as soon as we can, because it is an evolving market, and we want as much as we can to provide clarity to market participants. But I guess the last thing I'll say is we do see Cap and Invest as a very cost-effective way to reduce emissions, and that's a good opportunity for us because we do have ambitious climate reduction goals, and so Cap and Invest is an affordable way to do that. And there's a cost to inaction as well. So climate inaction in Washington State, we've experienced changes in our weather patterns. So there was intense flooding that happened recently, and we do see costs to inaction as well. So the Cap and Invest program is a cost-effective way to make progress on our greenhouse gas reduction goals, statutory obligations that we have, and that's an important part of our portfolio.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to remember that. It might be expensive, but it's less expensive than doing nothing. Markets are always the most cost-effective way to achieve these goals. Eduardo, do you think, is Mexico reviewing and looking at the US programs, and you know, are there any lessons that you've learned? I know that Washington did have some sort of initial teething trouble with setting the cap and very high prices. And you know, obviously RGGI has had its issues with states sort of in and out. Is Mexico taking this into account, do you think?
hopefully. Let's see what happens, but hopefully. One lesson learned is the one Derek just mentioned. Flexibility provided by the cap and trade or emissions trading systems is incomparable. I mean, flexibility makes it cheaper and most cost-effective to action directly, trying to mitigate the different costs of the economy. Right now, with energy prices increasing the amount of free allocation would have a benefit for consumers and wouldn't impact their pockets as much as taxes. But now we have taxes in place. So I'm pretty sure that the conversation will shift towards a more flexible approach in the forthcoming years, number one. And number two, we've learned a lot, of course, from our neighbors in the north, namely California. Mexico's ties with California are historic. And we have several agreements with the state governments of California to share knowledge and try to recreate parts of the Cap and Invest Now program in California in Mexico. And one of the most important lessons that we drew is the role of offsets. Mm-hmm. Mexican government is looking into an ETS that has a large portion of offsets. Apparently, this is just apparently because the secondary regulation has not been published yet. It will include up to 10% of offsets used for covered entities. That would be around 27 million tons that could be used from Mexican offsets. And this is a footnote, Mexican offsets, as of today. A very important thing that I didn't mention about subnationals in Mexico is that they allow the use of offsets to pay the tax. Not only Mexican offsets. Right now, and as of today, we have an informal linkage with some other economies. Namely, some Colombian projects are selling offsets to Mexico for compliance schemes. So this informal linkage that we have, it's in place, and apparently it will keep living for a couple of more years. Hopefully, Mexico also does see that there is value in linking with other economies, because reducing emissions in Mexico, it's inexpensive in some sectors, but we need more emission reductions to comply with our NDCs. So I foresee that if everything goes okay, and sharing Richard's optimistic views, Mexico will have linkage with other developing economies to comply with its NDCs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's encouraging. Justin, do you have any, advice for Eduardo or any country or even the states that are looking at designing a new program? It's
really interesting that, affordability is very much at the forefront of political discourse in the Northeast at the moment. If you look at the experience in New York with the New York Cap and Invest program, which is currently stalled in large part because the governor is concerned about affordability. And in fact, she's proposed to change the CLCPA, which is the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act, which set up the legislative sort of basis for the New York Cap and Invest program. She's looking to change the 2030 target, basically drop that, have a new target, just move it to 2040, keep the 2050 target, but all that is to buy time to try and keep the cost down and be able to argue that she's done something for affordability. So that conversation is ongoing. The legislature is not there yet, so that's a bit of a stalemate in New York at the moment. But I think that, in all of this conversation about affordability, if you look at RGGI, in large part, I can always find someone who will complain about pretty much anything, but will have an issue with RGGI. But if you look across the RGGI region and what's happened in terms of people's actual bills for power, their power bills have gone down in part because of the investments that have been made with the RGGI revenues into reducing emissions, which has really meant reducing combustion and insulating houses better and doing all the things that reduce emissions, as it happens, tend to reduce consumption at the individual household level, and that has been really helpful for cost. So I think one of the great advantages of a cap and invest program is the invest piece, right? You actually get access to some revenue that you can do something with. And the RGGI states, it's a linked program amongst 10 states. They all share the auction platform and they all get revenue based on the allocation under the cap. But once that revenue arrives in their state, it's sort of up to them what they do with it. We had a requirement in RGGI that you spend at least 25% of the money on, sort of public good emissions reduction. Every state has always way exceeded that, like more like 90%. But some states have at different times used the money to buy down bills for lower income folks. A couple of states have swiped the money and used it to balance their budget at different times. It's not been a long-term thing, but it has happened. But, I think my advice around that is, it's really up to the state, once they get the revenue, to think carefully about how they can invest that revenue to actually do the invest side of cap and invest in an appropriate way.
Yeah, well said. And I'm just going to stay with you, Justin, because you haven't yet mentioned Pennsylvania. And so I'm curious to hear, what you think might happen with the PACER and other possible rejoining.
So Pennsylvania is also, it's a pretty interesting one. Pennsylvania thought about joining RGGI right at the beginning, but they're a very big energy producing state. And because RGGI is based on generation, they were really concerned that they would be way high. I think it's telling that at the same time that the governor, the current governor, said he was not going to implement RGGI, even though they're technically a member, he also said, but we're going to have a Pennsylvania sort of version of RGGI. I don't think Pennsylvania has an issue with the structure of cap and invest per se. I think part of the challenge is the somewhat imbalance between Pennsylvania's economy and the economy of some of the other RGGI states, just the way they interact together. And then at that point, we get to the sort of big weakness of all of these programs, and that is that they're a creation of government. Like, we're creating scarcity where it doesn't exist through government regulation. That gives value to carbon that wouldn't necessarily be there in an economic sense, and it means that it sort of triggers people to think about how they can avoid that cost, do something different. But without the scarcity, you don't get the price signal. And without support from government, you don't get the scarcity consistently. And that's been a challenge in Pennsylvania for sure, and is just a challenge, I think, across all of these markets. If someone asks you what's the one thing that the market really wants, it's stability. It wants to know that things aren't going to change abruptly and quickly. And what's the one thing they don't get from governments that come in and out every 4 years? Stability. And it's not just this market. I mean, it's true that in a commodity market where a commodity might be scarce, you can't just create it out of nothing. But if we look at what's happened with the oil markets in the last few weeks, not because of regulation, but because of a government action, suddenly people are not sure which direction we're going, and it creates problems. So we're certainly not immune from that sort of thing in the carbon markets.
Yeah, and I think there's been a cloud hanging over all of the compliance markets since April of last year, and the executive order, which no one really knows whether that's still a threat, or whether it's gone. I think, we like to think that it's just kind of been forgotten about.
Right.
But
no.
Derek, I'm interested to get your views on whether you think that joining with California and Quebec makes you more vulnerable to a federal legal challenge, and if there's anything that you can do to, are you preparing for that already? Are you expecting that? Have you heard anything?
Yeah, I guess I'd say I'm incredibly proud of our Attorney General team. So they would be the ones who would know more about any potential preparation that we're doing. But we do have a really successful record in past lawsuits that we've had to provide legal assurance to entities in our market that we're on solid footing. And I think linking with California and Quebec is a net major positive. So we have these other jurisdictions with experience operating markets for over 10 years, and connecting with them gives us the opportunity to leverage that wisdom of other jurisdictions with history operating a market. It also, they have a lower price in general. So we have 2 jurisdictions that have an allowance budget around 6 times the size of ours. And so for us in Washington State, as a relatively smaller market, we can be a bit more bumpy, price-wise volatile. So I think combining forces across 3 jurisdictions, having the same rules apply for entities that participate in our 3 markets. California and Washington are relatively interconnected in the electricity and the fuels market. That provides a lot of benefit to us to connecting across jurisdictions and helping really simplify the rules. Right now, we're currently, at the beginning, I was talking about Washington is doing this, California is doing that, Quebec is doing this other thing. So covered entities are trying to track all 3 jurisdictions. And I think in a linked market, you're going to see more coordination, and it's going to be clear what's happening, and it'll be more and more predictable over time. So I think there's lots of benefits. And maybe Reggie is like the teenager and we're the preteen that's been getting ready for that. Reggie has a lot of experience with many members working together, doing program reviews, and we anticipate, I think, that we'd be able to provide coordinated signals to the market even more than we currently do, because it's tricky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's tricky for sure. Eduardo, I'm interested to know, as you may be the toddler here, but nonetheless you do have an NDC, whereas the US doesn't. How does that affect the way that offsets will be treated in your market? Are you looking at Article 6 and how that might play into a potential compliance market?
Well, you've done your research. Definitely. There is today a very big discussion in Mexico and on offsets and Article 6. Mexico, it's a large producer of offsets today. We produce around 5 million tons a year. Problem is, most of those offsets are right now being bought by American companies, mostly big tech, mostly here in California and some in your state also, by another large tech, yeah. And if they would fall under Article 6, then you wouldn't account them for your NDCs. Good thing is that we have a very good neighbor that just pulled out of the Paris Agreement. So we don't really have to withdraw those offsets from our accounts today. We wouldn't have to unless the neighbor falls again and joins the agreement again. So I do believe that it's a distinct feature for Mexico today. The authority is very well, not in control, but it knows very well how to handle that issue, the issue of selling offsets abroad that wouldn't qualify as your own offsets if they are sold abroad. And the strategy is twofold. Number one, creating very good quality offsets that could still be located with American companies or elsewhere that are highly viable for the markets, and at the same time create local offsets to comply with the local schemes that are, come from sectors that are right now not the hottest in international markets. So I would see Mexico producing more renewable energy efficiency projects, landfill projects, a very complex issue in Mexico, and at the same time keep producing forestry, high quality CCP label offsets in the forthcoming years. Yes. So I see that twofold strategy moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Right, well, at this point, I'd like to give the panel an opportunity. If you all have any questions that you'd like to address to each other based on what you've heard, if not, I'll open it up to the audience.
I was just going to make one comment on the legal action. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, it's sort of interesting. I always think, man, someone's suing you, that's got to be bad, right? And keep in mind, Vermont's a very small state, so this was not as unlikely as it might seem, but I walked into a bar the other day and sat down, and the Attorney General happened to be sitting next to me. And I said to her, wow, how about that, you know, lawsuit with the feds, right? We have 42 of them going at the moment, but I was referring, and because they heard oral arguments in the case. In that executive order from May 8th, Vermont and New York were called out specifically for their climate superfund laws. And, you know, you might think the Attorney General would be sort of upset about that, but she was thrilled because, you know, politics is all about difference. And as a Democrat Attorney General, the opportunity to go into court and start talking about how much she dislikes the current administration, that's all upside for her and with her base. So she didn't seem at all concerned about it. But I think your premise is right. I mean, it creates challenges in the market when people are trying to work out what's going to happen next and what the longevity of all these things is. I guess I do have my question to for Washington, and maybe it's a little premature, but this is going so well with the Quebec and California. Do you imagine in the future other states or provinces joining as well?
Yeah, I think I'll talk hypothetically, right. I guess, where California and Quebec have linkage, California has SB 1018 findings that they need to do. We have linkage criteria that we need to meet, so we need to see another jurisdiction meeting those, and that's not something we're looking at right now, right. I guess is what I'd say.
And I mean, we joked earlier about the possibility of Mexico linking. I guess this is sort of far-fetched, but is this something that we can imagine other states, you know, we have here, like we've mentioned, North Carolina, Oregon. Could we piece together a carbon market, potentially including Mexico? Or?
Well, I do see in the future, in somehow, in let's say 10 years' time, the need of at least a partial linkage in terms of offsets. Of course, supplying offsets to our neighbor in the north. I think that that's something realistic that could happen. That's more a question to you also, if you're looking into international offsets, but that's definitely something that it's in Mexico's administration's minds as of today. Of course, it would require Article 6 or something different, provided that most jurisdictions of course, there are subnational jurisdictions, so we need something different to work instead of Article 6. That's something very particular to North America. And on another note, that we would need to explore more subnational Mexican entities entering into some kind of cooperation with with other North American jurisdictions. As of today, there are some talks between the state of Querétaro and Quebec and some other subnationals, but none of them reflect a formal linkage of those programs today.
Mm-hmm. And you know, important to remember that when the New York governor first announced NICI, she said at the time that her goal was that ultimately it would be linked with WCI. Now, obviously, there's some challenges there. It's been delayed, and you know, it would have to be set up. I mean, as Derek mentioned, for linking to happen with either California or Quebec or Washington or anyone, you need to know what you're linking to. So they need to have a program to link first. So I think we're a number of years away from it. But I would say that whether it's WCI or some future cap and invest type program or some other thing, the thing that doesn't change in all of this, well, there's two things. One is somewhat artificial and could change. There's the legislative mandates to reach certain emissions reduction targets. Throughout the Northeast, those mandates are still in place, even though there's been some chopping and changing in the policy to get there, and there'll be some further conversation about the dates. But they're still in place, and frankly, the more permanent thing that's still in place is the changes we're seeing in the climate. I mean, there's challenges to whether it's the maple syrup producers in Vermont or the ski season in Maine and New Hampshire and New York, whether it's sea level rise along the coast, the New England coast, and in Connecticut and New York, you know, and Massachusetts. We're still seeing all those things happening at the faster end of the scale of what was predicted. So I think the pressure to do something about it, whilst it's not a linear sort of thing, will continue from the people who are impacted by it.
Let's on that note, let's open it up. Are there any questions from the audience? I think we have a microphone here.
Hello. Hi, thank you. I'm Shashank from Wood Mackenzie. All of these markets are markets that we follow very closely on a daily basis, so thank you for the fantastic discussion. Specifically on RGGI, I had two questions. One is with Virginia planning to come back and be the 11th state. One of the things about Virginia that makes it different is it's got the highest concentration of data centers in the world. And that sort of puts it in a completely different league in terms of power generation. Historically, we've seen that Virginia has been one of the highest emitting contributors among the 10, 11 states. But I'm wondering, moving ahead, will that really disturb the pricing pattern and add a lot more pressure to the market? On that note, I also understand that there's a fourth program review coming up with RGGI in 2028. In terms of, for those observing the markets and looking at it very closely, what do you expect to be debated during that period? And is there something that can surprise us?
So I think, you know, the data centers, I mean, it's clearly a big deal. I mean, you know, when I said earlier that Pennsylvania was a little bit different sort of economically than the other states, I mean, they're all different, but it's had a sort of standout difference. I think Virginia is getting close to that, certainly with the number of and size of the data centers that are currently proposed there. You know, it's clearly going to be a conversation with the other RGGI states around both what the overall cap is, with Virginia included, and then also you know, what the allocation might be going forward of the cap amongst the states. I'll talk about that in a moment. But you know, it's not just electric generation that's going to be a challenge there. Some of these bigger data centers use a huge amount of water for cooling and that sort of thing. So they're going to run into some other issues, I think. But it'll be a negotiation. There's no reason to leave the state out of the market. And in fact, it may be a way for them to generate, you know, from the state's perspective, these folks are coming in there, they're clearly doing well by being there, and this is a way for the state to generate some revenue back that might help them with some of the infrastructure, both around the data centers, but also some of the other issues they have. And previously when they were in, they spent money on the Chesapeake Bay and some flooding issues and that sort of thing. So I think they'll work it out. It's just going to be a conversation with the states. And then it'll be an ongoing conversation, because when they roll into the next program review, one of the questions that will come up is, what to do with the allocations amongst the states. And I always describe that, although it doesn't happen so much these days, but back, you'll remember when family plans first came out, with your cell phone, and you sat down with your spouse and maybe your kids and said, okay, we get to share these minutes. Who's getting them, right? It can be a difficult conversation, because the kids burn them all up in the first month, and it's like, no, that's not how this is going to work. But so the RGGI states have traditionally done a really good job of talking to each other and talking through those issues. And that's not one that really impacts the market so much, because it really impacts where the money goes after the auction, but it doesn't change the cap. It's just the allocation within the cap. So I think both of those things really mean that the states are going to have to work closer together. I hope it doesn't make program review longer. I think I've made comments on behalf of IETA that we think they should have a set schedule for the program review and just get it done, because waiting for a year or two for who knows what doesn't actually make it any easier, and it's really hard on the market participants, but we'll see.
And I mean, we've skirted around pricing a bit. Justin, you mentioned, the milestone of RGGI converging with California. But I think the real opportunity here is sort of, obviously, the Washington price is kind of double what California is, but we're hearing there's a very, very strong chance now that they could be linked by, that we haven't talked about it, but by the November deadline, right? So just an informal poll, this wasn't planned, but who thinks that by this time next year, the Washington and California price will have converged? Anybody? No? We still think, and what do you think the trigger will be then for that gap to close? And I know, you're not traders, but will the Washington price come down to California? Will there be a meeting in the middle? It's a much smaller market. So what do you think is going to be that aha moment when it becomes the same?
Yeah, I mean, I run the auctions and the market, so I do have to recuse myself from speculating about prices. But yeah, hopefully our upcoming rulemaking will provide some clarity about some of the supply changes that were passed last year. So HB 1975 is a bill that expanded allowance supply, expanded the allowance price containment reserve. I did a workshop with my team on that last October, and that will be implemented through this upcoming rulemaking. So I think that'll be something that maybe people have been wondering exactly how we'll implement that, and we can provide clarity through that rulemaking that, again, needs to finish by October of this year. So I think that's something that probably market participants are very interested in, and then of course, any signals from California and Quebec are also important as you look towards what will converge towards linkage. But yeah, we do anticipate being a linked market by sometime next year, and in advance of the compliance period, at the full quadrennial compliance period for us. We have a 4-year compliance period. And one other thing on that I think has been a point of uncertainty at times for people. And again, this is on our website, so it's not a secret, is whether or not allowances from the other jurisdictions of prior vintage would be fungible for Washington State for compliance. So effectively, if you had a 2018 allowance in California and Quebec, linkage occurred, could you use that 2018 allowance for compliance in Washington State? And the answer is yes, you could. So I think upon linkage, to the extent an entity is both in California and Washington, or Quebec and Washington, there would be that opportunity to meet a Washington compliance obligation. So yeah, I think like Washington State regulators are here in this conference. We want to provide certainty for market participants. So if you do have questions or things that you think would be helpful clarity, like we are interested in hearing from you, that we can provide those clear market signals. So yeah, come get me in the coffee breaks.
Absolutely. Well, I think we have time for a couple more questions. Denise?
Thank you, Denise Cathy, Argus Media. I've got two questions, if I can do them real quick. Derek, first is for you. HB 1975, we last heard from you guys in October about, the changes to the APCR as well as the potential impacts of changing the statutory deadlines. Do we have a sense of how many allowances this might shift, or when we might next get an update ahead of the rulemaking hopefully finishing next October?
Yeah, and I misspoke at the, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I misspoke at the beginning, so it is October of this year that the rulemaking would be completed. So yeah, that's not too far away, and we would be in Washington State. So just a bit, since I did work in California before coming here, in California you have a more flexible rule change system where the initial statement of reasons, the initial rule package, can look different from the final rule package, much more than is possible in Washington State. So I think for Washington, when we do our initial rule packet, that would help provide some really specific clarity, because we can't deviate that far from that in our final rulemaking.
Okay, and just to clarify, so the next update we would get would be once that packet is out?
Yeah, no later than that.
Okay, perfect. My last question is for Justin. The first year of Trump's presidency, we had a lot of changes in the renewable energy space. Looking at a market that runs on energy, now that we're sort of out of the dazed and confused about the potential impacts, how are you seeing this play out in year two of this administration with these markets that are looking to do data centers while still being part of RGGI and meet their commitments?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, so one of the challenges is that a couple of years ago, when you looked at RGGI going forward, the cap was coming down, there was all these proposals, offshore wind was going to pick up a bunch of the slack there. There seemed a lot more immediate options. Today, not so much. I mean, I think there's still a fair bit to play out in the courts when it comes to some of those offshore wind projects. I think we will ultimately see them come online, the majority of them. But the ISO queue in New England sort of drops off pretty sort of rapidly after you get through the sort of immediate proposals. And so it does raise the question of where is the power going to come from, and how much carbon is going to be associated with that. So I think that's a really good question, because in RGGI at least, despite the regular program reviews and the sort of subtle changes here and there and states in and out, the thing that's really driven the price over time and driven the market has been what's the cap and what's the demand. And I could tell people, if we have a really cold winter, if the polar vortex hits and it's 24 below, you can expect the RGGI price to go up, because there's the obligated entities have just increased their obligation. And so I think that there will be a lot of folks needing to look forward from here at what that looks like as the cap comes down. Where is that power going to come from? But I also think, you know, it changes fairly quickly. It's going to be a difficult thing. I mean, today when suddenly oil, natural gas, you know, diesel fuel, and we, on a really cold day in New England, we burn a lot of diesel fuel for electricity, even now. That sends emissions through the roof, but that would be a very expensive proposition right now. I mean, the average homeowner in New England now, if they have a 275-gallon diesel tank that lasts them a month, it's going to cost them $1,200 to fill the thing every month over the winter. So, and that's just a homeowner. That's not someone running it in it to actually generate electricity. So I think the market fundamentals don't really go away in any of this, and I think sometimes you could push aside all the noise and just look at that as the sort of place to start when you're trying to work out where things are going to go. But I wish I had a great answer. I wouldn't have to, you know, work so hard, probably.
Well, we didn't really get a chance to talk about future growth, but you know, maybe I'm going to give you each like a very short time at the end. But I think, did I see one more question? This is going to be the last question, so we only have a couple of minutes left, and I really want to end on time, being the last session of the day. Is that Slade?
Hi there, my name is Slade Rand. I'm with Opus. This could be a really short answer. This is for Derek. I know you can't speak about future pricing or anything like that in a linked market, but I'm wondering if you all, or through talks with CARB, have given thought to what the APCR level might be, or price floors in these linked auctions. Is there talk of adjusting those, as you know, currently we're seeing quite different pricing in the two markets?
Yeah, so I guess one thing on that, I think it's potentially instructive to look at, we have both a current vintage auction as well as a future vintage auction. We are seeing that future vintage auction price is harmonizing pretty closely with the California-Quebec price at this point. Although we only hold 2 future vintage auctions per year, but that is in very close alignment at this stage with California and Quebec's price. Our floor price, we call it a floor price, they call it an auction reserve price, but it's the same mechanism. Those are harmonized in terms of rule language. We would absolutely harmonize it exactly in a linked market, because it doesn't really work for you to have different floor prices across jurisdictions. They need to be exactly the same. So that's something that we would need to do either through practice or in rule language in the upcoming rule development phase. APCR systems, or APCR auctions, if anyone in the audience doesn't know what that is, it's additional allowances that can be used for compliance at any time. So you can use them for, you can buy them this year, use them for last year's obligation. Those don't have to have an exactly harmonized price, but our price is generally harmonized with the California and Quebec system. And then we had legislation, HB 1975, that I talked about briefly before, that did lower our price ceiling to $80 for 2026 and 2027. But it did give us flexibility upon linkage to adjust it in the future. So, okay. Yeah, good questions.
Well, we are 1 minute over, so I want to just give everybody a chance to sort of wrap up now. I think the next year is going to be a really interesting, crucial year for the compliance carbon market. So I'm very interested to hear, you know, what's your sort of one key takeaway that we should be watching for over the next year? Eduardo?
Well, it's the final hour for Mexico. Either we have an ETS soon, or we go to the subnational solution. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of years. I'd say 2026, 2027 will be definite for Mexico carbon markets.
Mm-hmm. Great. Derek?
Yeah, I'd say I'm going to poach your 26 and 27 line, because I think that's
6,
key.
7.
But yeah, exactly. I do have a preteen myself. And yeah, so I'm excited about the upcoming rulemaking, as only a regulator can be. But yeah, I think that'll be helpful, and it's been neat to work again with former colleagues in California more closely as we get closer to linkage.
Well, I'm looking forward to all the RGGI states having implemented the model rule, the new regulations, and it'd be great to see a year of that before we get into doing another program review.
It never ends, right? Well, great. Thank you so much to everyone who stuck around for this last session of the day. Thank you to my speakers. I think it's been a really interesting chat. So, and do feel free to come and talk to us, although we'll probably be heading to drinks pretty quickly. So. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.